Everybody, welcome back with the Plat and the Lolliet, your two resident Bazaarians. I believe that is what we're called when you are a member of the Bazaar. How has your week in the Bazaar been, Lolliet?
Been really good. I think I'm like plus 500, little plum bobs or whatever those are called, the gems.
Okay, in the
And
gems, what about your rank? Have you gone up in rank? Because that's your value as a human. I want to know
oh
how much I
yes,
value you.
and I have been moving up in the ranks. Although I got 8 wins on my last run, and so I got 10 wins, and I moved up 20 ranks to like 1160th or whatever. And then I got 8 wins, and they said back back of the bus for you or whatever. You know what I mean? So they shoved me way back like 200 ranks. So I'm back to like
Man,
320 or something,
yeah, only
which is
only
unfortunate.
8 wins, bro. Get good.
Get
Maybe
out of here. They
do you,
said you don't belong with us.
they bring up a Criparian videos like, do you need a guide? And here you go. Maybe you should try this out. I have played one game this week, one and a half. I was playing a one here before that. I was on 0 wins on day 5, and I was like, you know what? Let's clear that out. Let's get some good energy in this room instead. So I'm still not super active. Basically, Pygmalion's in a rough spot, although I still think he is viable from what I've seen of other people that are pretty good with Pygmalion. There are the best Pygmalions in the world are still climbing with him, seemingly pretty regularly. But I just don't like the current meta myself, and the changes. There basically was no patch this week like we were hoping, and it doesn't sound like there's going to be a patch for a month, about a month at this point after not having a patch for 2 weeks. And maybe a hot fix or something like 2 weeks ago, but that's it. So I think that's going to be what we're going to talk about. This might be a little redundant, but we're going to talk about how there's nothing to talk about in some sense. But yeah, so what do you have to say about that? Because we basically got a Q&A video, which I think was the video you already watched, but then he added like an intro to it basically from the stream.
Yeah, and yeah, it was really just one of the two videos that I had already watched, and I did see the Discord version of the post saying, we're going to take time off during the holidays. We've been kind of working in overdrive for months and months and months in preparation of and the initial open beta, sorry, closed beta, as it has been. And they have put out like 5 or 6 patches in a 2 month period, which is a high amount of activity, right? And of course,
Yes.
the last patch was highly experimental, where they changed a lot of things about the initial like day one experience and the level up experience, which I think are two of the most impactful areas of the game. So with those changes, they did not seem like they were planning on taking Christmas off. So I'm gonna let Platt kind of talk about that, about how, you know, normally if you're going to take a time period off, your last patch, you're gonna be like, all right, guys, this is what you got, right? And they did do two immediate like hot fixes within 24 hours of that patch, but then they just waited 2 weeks to tell us, or maybe a week and a half, whatever it was, to really just tell us that, oh, we're actually not going to do anything, and this patch will be live for like 6 straight weeks.
Yeah, so it's kind of weird. One, like this is one of the last patch. That's why our last video was called like 3 steps forward, 1 step back, or something like that. Um, I feel like a lot of their patches go that way. They make a lot of them, and I'm always like, this is all really good, but there's always that thing that's really kind of dragging it back a little bit. So the timeline is very, very weird in a sense. There's a couple weird things about the timeline. First, just regarding the patch. I don't play Marvel Snap, but I follow some creators that do. And there was like a patch like this early December, like even a week or two ago at this point. And they were like, hey, this is the last OTA until mid-January. Like they announced it when the patch came out. And this is the last patch we're going to do because they usually come out early in the month, but we're taking the end of the month off. So you're going to have to stick with this meta for a little while. And everyone's like, all right, that makes sense. For us, it was kind of weird because they did a patch. They didn't mention holiday season at all. And then 2 weeks passed. First, we were like, okay, there's been 1 week. We're going to get a patch because, we've been getting almost weekly patches. Not really, but like close to. Then there was nothing. And then there was second week. We're like, okay, well, surely this one. And instead of getting a patch, we got an update saying, hey, 4 more weeks of no patches potentially. So it really kind of like was just bad marketing. And I think that this is something that the company is just learning, or they're not very skilled at yet. They're very skilled at making games, but this is their first game. They don't necessarily have the best communication to the audience because I feel like they might just be adjusting on the fly. Maybe they, like you said, maybe they didn't know they were going to take the holiday off. But typically what you would expect is like they would announce like, hey, we're taking the holidays off, we're not going to be doing much to the game, here is a final patch, this is your meta over the holiday season. Even if they did that 2 weeks ago, I think everyone would have been more accepting, because a lot of people were probably in the state I'm in, where you're like, I don't really like this meta. I'm just going to wait a week and then I'll start playing again when they change something. And then nothing came. I'm like, okay, well, next week is going to be the one where they change something. And then I didn't play for another week. And now I'm like, oh, now there's 4 weeks. They're not going to change anything. Well, now I'm like, now I'm 2 weeks inexperienced comparatively to the other people. Do I just wait until the new patch, or do I try to get back into it now? So that's all kind of just like weird. The only other final thing is just the overall timeline of the game, I think was a little probably misjudged from them, because they like planned on the game to go to closed beta, and then like right at when Christmas time, like we would be in open beta right now, and then almost like right between open beta and full launch, they're planning on taking potentially like a multi-week vacation for Christmas and stuff for the full launch of the game, which is like the worst possible time right before the full launch of your game. So I think overall their timeline is something that we probably should not look too seriously at, because they're probably very used to having very fluctuating timelines internally. Their internal, you could just tell the way they're handling things are the way they've been handling things internally. They are not treating this game like it has thousands and thousands and thousands of players waiting for little drops of information, like, please tell us something, change a little something. They're just kind of doing their thing like they were before the game was out, and now they're continuing to do it. And I think that as a company, as it goes to open beta and launch, closed beta, I guess it's whatever, but I do think they will need to adapt to that and just have a more customer facing forward approach, because again, they've been closed off for 6 years just making their game, doing their own internal systems and stuff. So they're probably not used to thousands of people swarming their Discord, like giving them bad emojis. Like, we're gonna take a Christmas break and half the emojis are people shitting on them. I want them to take a break. I really want them to enjoy their time off. They've done a great job this year. I just think it's the communication needs a little bit more to it. Did I cover everything? Did I
Yeah.
ramble too much there?
No, I think that was perfect, and I'm gonna now step into talking out of my ass mode, right?
Oh,
So
okay.
this is none of this is based in reality. This is just Laliette's opinion of what could have possibly happened, right? So what it seems like from what I have seen in the game, which everybody else has seen along with me, is and it definitely supports what Platt said about just doing the same thing they've always done, right? Like not very much communication unless we feel like communicating something, right? And that's something I think that they will fix like in between now and launch, and they might be forced to do it just because of negative feedback, whatever. I'm very positive and trusting because when Reynad talks about things, even though sometimes he holds opinions that I think are like counterintuitive to what's best for me as an independent player, I think he's always honest, and I think he always has what's best for the game's longevity and like existing in 10 years at his heart. You know what I mean? So
Hmm.
he loves this game more than we love this game, and that's something we always need to remember. Now, with that said, it seems like the pacing was originally supposed to look something like this. The first month was going to be closed beta, right, from like the 30th of October to maybe like, the first week of December would be closed. And then we'd have open beta. And whatever the patch for open beta looked like might have just been the persistent patch until January, right? And they would come out and they would say, hey, we're going to take a couple weeks off for, Christmas or whatever, holiday you celebrate. And then we're going to kind of pick it back up full throttle in January. Then in January, they would come in, maybe not do a big patch, maybe do a small patch, but then do a bunch of inner workings of the game for launch, and then launch the game at either, the end of January, right? Was kind of what it looked like we were going to have originally for the runtime. Now we know, like, that's not what happened.
Hmm.
They misjudged and were very ambitious in all of these things. And I want to say first and foremost, I'm very happy that they made the choice to launch the game into closed beta when they did. I don't care if we have a broken placeholder legend system and it doesn't really work. I don't care if the balance is off and sometimes you're forced to play in very narrow lines that actually are competitive. I don't care about any of those things because it allows me to play and enjoy the game, and we're gaining so much value in not only like grinding for these 173 chests that Plat has,
Yeah.
or however many gems you've been able to get. I got like almost 4K gems now. All of these cosmetics that we're getting that someday are going to have some theoretical value on their open markets thing, whether you're just grinding a whole bunch of tickets, whatever it is, and of course the value of the in-game experience. These are things that are worth more money than I can really put a denomination on, that we will have when open beta happens, and of course when launch happens and more players join this game. So if you're actually in the game right now, or even just watching content on the game and not playing the game, you are so far ahead of the curve, that we wouldn't be able to get all of this information if they would have chose to wait until the game was more perfect.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. And it's been like I've had, I don't know how many hours I have in the game, but I have a lot. I have 173 chests. I've opened over 50 to 100 chests already, and I haven't played in 2 weeks. And so this gives you a context of how hard I was grinding the game. I played a little bit in the last 2 weeks, just not a lot. But it's been an incredibly fun experience. So I am also very grateful they released the game, and just in the state that it's in. I think the game is actually in a pretty great state. It's like right now, if you are a brand new player playing the game for the first time, if they open the floodgates, they let whatever twice as many people in. I think it would take quite a while for people to break the meta. I think we take for granted that we could see the changes and we could adapt to the changes because we already have a fundamental understanding of what kind of things are powerful. So I actually think that this would be a great release version of the game. Even though I'm not super loving the fire and burn stuff right now, or the burn and poison stuff, but I mean, it's so much better than it was when it went into closed beta. Like, imagine them launching it with the space scraper, skyscraper as like the top meta thing. Everyone would have a
And infinite
fundamental idea
command.
of like 1.4 second, 30,000 damage is the desire of the end game. I mean, the game was fun, but it was like fundamentally broken at a certain point. And they've kind of dabbled with metas like that, and the balance is not perfect. But I mean, it's in a way better spot. 3 steps forward, 1 step back. They're making progress. They just, they bring usually a couple hiccups with it as well. But one of the things we were talking about, because they're not doing anything for a month apparently, because they're going to come out. They said they're going to go back to the office on the 6th, and then they're going to get started. So we're not getting a patch on the 6th. That's going to be, maybe they'll hotfix some stuff. But basically, he said like we can hotfix stuff by removing items, but that's pretty much all we could do until we do full patches. And patches, they say, are apparently it's a big thing. All right, I'm not a game developer, but they claim it takes a lot of resources and energy and timing of a different teams. And okay, so I believe him. I doubt he is lying about that. So it's going to take a while to get a patch, even after the 6th, maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks after that. But we were talking about, it's not all bad. Everyone knows the bad things of no patches for a long time. The meta gets solved relatively, kind of. And then beyond that, it also is just less exciting to play. It's less fun to play when there aren't consistent changes. People could fall into like a similar pattern of playing, especially if like you think you know the meta, you kind of just fall into that groove of doing the same thing every time. And then at that point, you're like, I don't want to do the same thing 50 times in a row. But what are some of the positive lollies? What are the good things? And maybe if you want to point out some of the bad things as well about having such a long time between patches compared to what we're used to.
Yeah, so I wanted to focus more on the positive things, and I'll let you speak to the negative things because I think
Yeah.
you are experiencing the negative things, right? Just like organically through your play pattern, and I'm experiencing some of the positive things because I've continued to play and continued to build the skill sets, etc. Right? So, first we're gonna kind of talk about what the play cycle of a long patch looks like. Now, everybody's pretty familiar with this from other TCGs, but we just kind of wanted to outline this is the first time we're going to be able to experience this, and that they're going to be able to get the data on this full cycle. So like generally if you play like a seasonal game, right, where they 1 month might be a season or something like that, so you usually have roughly 4 weeks to play the game. The first few days is everybody playing what they think was good, right, what maybe there are some spoilers on what cards were coming out or whatever. People make content on those theoretical builds. Day 1, day 2, day 3, we're playing theoretical builds. Then people figure out what's actually good. Then people perfect what is actually good, right? So like those are your first like 3 steps.
That's why
That
it's
could
always
take
aggro
any.
decks are good. Then as people figure out the list, control decks and Magic tend to be the top of the format, but it takes a couple weeks to get their minimum.
Exactly. So at that point, you're somewhere around like 2 weeks in. We've perfected and we've kind of been running the perfect decks, and people feel bad because, um, in constructed games, you play the perfect deck, they play the perfect deck, but they play it better, so you lose in the mirrors, and then that feels really bad. Um, or you just can't afford the perfect deck, and then you lose to the perfect deck with your less perfect deck or whatever you decided to play. Those are not fun experiences. In our game, it's much more like you can't always hit the perfect build. So like, even though right now poison is really strong, and so are the ray builds, right? The burn builds and dually. Dually has 6 cores. You only get to see three of them. There's 2 cores that are way better than the rest of the cores, and there's 3 cores that I would say are like the 3 best cores, right? And you're going to miss out on all 3 of those some percentage of the time. You're going to get shown the other 3. So just by that by itself, you're not always going to be able to play Poison Dooley if that's what you want to play. You're not always going to be able to play Burn Dooley or Raise. The same thing with every other character, right, Platt?
Yeah, I mean, when you start as Pig, I mean, I think Dooley falls into it a bit more with the cores, but like, because like Pig or whatever, you get to sell your silver item if you and pivot, like, oh, I found Lion Scraper day one. But fundamentally, you find Pawn Shop, you find Belt, you're on day 7, you never find a double whammy or you won't always be able to force a build, of course. So you always have to, at least on some level, play adaptively to what you get.
And the like problem, quote unquote, with our game is that statistically, some people will hit the high roll version and play the best builds because they'll be 10x the number of people than what you're seeing at the top of, like, once you get to day 10, you're playing people who didn't lose earlier,
Yeah.
right? And so it's going to thin out towards the top. And the only builds making it to day 12, 14, 15 are the best builds de facto, right? So once you're like, okay, I understand it's going to be the best builds, then they're going to be all the meta builds and all the things that immediately counter the meta builds.
Yeah, you're not gonna find a janky homebrew at the top. Maybe you'll find one, and it was Kriparian, but it's like, again, like that's one out of 10,000 builds or something like that. It's like the other 999,000, 9,999 are just gonna be the meta stuff. The ones that make it because they're the strongest. So yeah, when you look at an aggregate, it just, like you said, triangle.
So you're always going to have the worst players in the pool that are playing that build or attempting to playing that build, and they're going to have bad numbers. They're the base of that pyramid that goes towards the top, where it gets thinned out each day. But in the early days, there's going to be a crazy amount of those people playing that deck, and you can still only see one person per day. So your individual experience might be poison is really good because after day 6, I see 50% poison. Well, just 50% Dooley, right? Some form of good Dooley. So I think Dooley is broken. And in reality, the win rate might actually math out to be that Dooley is not any better than whatever build you were playing as Vanessa or as Pig. But because so many people are playing it and you end up going against it more often past day 6, your personal experience is that it's broken. They're going to see on the back end that it's actually like a 51% win rate deck, which is perfectly acceptable, right?
Hmm.
In a meta.
Yeah, no, that all makes sense to me. I don't have anything to add to that point.
So the next phase, I believe, is we went through like the initial like what we think is good, what is good, the evolution of the perfected version of what's good, and then what counters what is good, right? So like stage 4 in that process would be the countering. And me and Platt talk a lot about like metagaming, not always directly, but Platt has always played Pig, and Pig very often has just had the metagame components in his builds.
Yes. He's been probably the strongest character since launch up until this last patch.
Which is probably one of the feel bad things about if you historically have been a Pig player, right? You've just always had this very Pig has a very wide arsenal, maybe not the tallest arsenal, right? So like the most broken things historically haven't really been in Pig. There are some broken things that have been in Pig, but they were like much more of a narrow niche, like bees And then it's like, well, can you find a bee? You don't always find bees. And then it's like, Crook is really good if you can get it early, but Crook is not good if you hit it on day 6. So there's these different things going on with Pig. But Pig has a very wide array of different builds he can play that are all able to get 10 wins, which is what made him able to counter the meta so well. Because if you're like, okay, everybody's playing aggro, well, I go HP Pig or Freeze Pig or one of these, Shield Pig, one of these kind of builds. Um,
Yeah, well,
and now
Shield Pig's
that
perfect because Shield Pig is perfect because it feels like it counters everything in the sense that you could survive the aggro, because you just have a lot more tankiness. If they're not aggro enough, you just outscale them and then kill them with your shield. And then third, it's actually pretty good against poison because it doesn't actually interact with your shield. So you either die to the poison or you one-shot them. It's actually Shield Pig's pretty bad against burn though, because it just continuously scales up and burn gets ridiculous the more points of burn there are. But sorry, continue on.
Yeah, but that's still pretty good. If you're only weak to one of those like meta things, then that's pretty nice. So, what we're hoping is going to happen, right, is this week that this podcast comes out should be the week you see the shift in the meta towards that counter meta. The counter should start getting larger in number and either equaling or surpassing the number of dualies that you see. It's really tough that Dooley has 2 of the most oppressive builds because people mentally will kind of just combine them together. They're like, I lost to Dooley again, Dooley's broken, but it's like, well, was it Companion Core? Was it Shield Core? Was it Burn Core? Because those are 3 completely different cores with completely different like endgame strategies, etc. And even if you're playing like Ray and 2 of those, like you could play the Rays with either Burn Core or Shield Core. Um,
And I
but
saw it
those
in a
are
companion core build, and it actually was badass. It was definitely not optimal, but it was still strong. But yeah.
yeah. So I mean, those are 2 different builds though. So like
Yes.
you will conflate them naturally, as is the experience of a player. I see Dooley, I lose to Dooley. Dooley is doing stuff where I just see a bunch of animations that do this and say that he's going really fast, and then I lose, right? So it's like that's unfortunate because you might be conflating 2 or 3 different builds all with the same problem.
Yeah, it's funny because Dooley. Every time I see Dooley, I'm like, I don't know what the fuck they're doing. I just like, sometimes I can't tell where the numbers are coming from. Nothing on their board is like, why does this have 50,000 shield on it? And I'm like, okay, I still don't know. It's like, and then it's all the anime. So yeah, playing against Dooley is I think that will be one of the best when they get the battle preview kind of thing where you could actually pause or like maybe like rewatch a fight or something. Will be the most helpful to just be able to really see what's going on, because like sometimes I'm looking around like, wait, what caused me to freeze? What caused the fight's over? What was it? Was it a skill? I don't see a skill. Was it this? And then there's like a Walter cooler and I just like missed it. But it's like, how did it freeze all my items? So yeah, fighting Dooley is the hardest for me to deduce anything from. Like I never know how that match is gonna go.
Yeah, and no, and that's excellent. That really highlights kind of the focus on um, player information. If you don't play Dooley and you aren't familiar with all of his items and all the skills that he's going to be using, it's impossible to really know what the hell they're doing, because there's a lot of animations. The game usually gets over pretty fast. There's well, I guess just a lot of animations, because even like the little flamethrower thing distracts my eyes, right? So if I'm trying to read a specific card and look at the text, I'll get distracted by the poison line splashing onto my guy, or the fire line, or the haste lines going at each other, or the lightning bolts, right, that come off from some of the skills. Like there's so much animation is going on so fast. That it's important for us to be able to understand why we lose. Because when we talk about that emotional effect that losing has, like that feels bad. Like even though Reynad might not think there's a problem with freeze, freeze can feel bad because you don't do anything, right? And losing when you don't know why can feel bad even if it was a fair loss, right? So if I don't know what happened, I'm going to have a negative connotation of that gameplay experience.
Yeah, because okay, the difference between losing at 4 million shields and you died to poison feels better than losing to freeze where you never did a thing, even though maybe you had maybe they were both math out to a perfect 0% chance of ever winning. It doesn't matter. It matters, but like one of them felt a lot better. You're like, look how many fucking shields I got, bro. World record shields. This is day 8, 10 million shields, but you still like lost. It doesn't matter. You could feel feel good about that. So yeah, that's fun. That's fundamentally the issue with freeze, is that no one has fun on the receiving end of freeze, like ever. No one's like, oh yay, freeze build I'm going up against. I hope they hit the one item that I have, Um, I think freeze is
No,
fine as a mechanic, but I do think that it should be adjusted a little bit to make it less feels bad in some way. We've talked about
right.
that in previous
And
episodes, but
yeah, and to just kind of highlight that point, the thing that we think is important when you're having an interaction in an asynchronous game is that you feel like your build did whatever it's supposed to do. Now you can lose when it did that because you're either too weak or you had a bad matchup or whatever it is. But if your pieces don't move and don't do anything, that feels bad because all the preparation you did feels like it didn't matter when mathematically in both cases, like against the poison, like he said, they literally didn't matter. Like you picked the wrong mechanic against this matchup, shield is not going to interact with poison, blah blah blah. But there is emotional and experiential feels bad in those cases.
and I'll add one more point. I do think that even beyond that, that's the main reason, but I think a secondary thing that it's just unhealthy for the game in some aspect is that when you're putting a build together, we're not all computers. We don't always know exactly how things are going to synergize in a way, and you don't even get to learn about your own build when you go up against a freeze thing and you get frozen. You don't even get to see how your items are interacting. You're like, okay, that, like, as a new player, it could take more games to understand, like, oh, this is a triggered ability. It doesn't count as being used when it's being triggered because all your things are frozen, none of them did anything. Or, you just find new items. Like, I'm playing Mac for the first time. If I go up against freeze build and I'm trying to see, let's see if this works like this. Like, well, I don't know. It's a loss and I don't have any more information. I have to play another day or go up against so like that's a lesser thing, but I do think it is important. Like, it's really boring to go up against a mechanic that also hinders your learning on top of all the other negatives in the game, the
Yeah.
negatives that it comes with.
And just as an aside, I am curious about how many things we just take for granted because we have so much game knowledge from hundreds of hours of playing, right? It's just
Yes,
like there are newer players coming in, like Northern Lion came in like a week and a half ago or whatever,
he's my
and
favorite
it's
content
like
creator for the last decade, by the way. I've been watching him almost every day for over a decade.
that's really cool. So for those players, I'm very curious to the like how much information we have that we just take for granted that they're like, ooh, this is really interesting, and I'm learning this all in one patch, and I don't think about all the changes that we think about, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, it's
So
there's a lot I know about the game that I don't remember, that I didn't know when I first played it. It's like, oh yeah, that's right. I had to learn how these things interact, and I was like, because the first time I'm like, I don't even know if Yo-Yo's good. It sounds good, but it's got one damage. I mean, am I ever gonna be able to scale that thing? I mean, who knows? And now I'm like, oh yeah. I mean, come on, it's like the most insane thing ever. Not anymore. It's still very good though. But yeah. So we were talking about the 4-week kind of patch cycle as being a not patch cycle, but the was there anything to add to that as far as the positives?
yeah, so at this point in the conversation, we should be at like week 2. We're expecting this week that you're seeing this to see that shift. If that doesn't happen, that
Yes,
means
that's
that
right.
they allowed a truly overpowered, build. If it's not counterable, right? If we just mathematically are not able, because this week I guarantee you, whoever's playing the game is going to be doing their best to counter it, right? If they think there's a high EV solution to countering it, they're going to do it because that helps them climb, etc. And then if they make videos about it and content, people are going to see that and people are going to want to do that. Now, if we're not able to actualize that counter strategy, then that means that they did make a mistake. If 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 we are able to counter it, then it actually turns out that it's okay for them to leave this patch for so long, right? If we're able to counter it and shift the meta towards these things that are countering the poison, it's not my favorite way to have games play where you're forced to counter something, but it is an actuality in most games that you will eventually reach an apex, and you will have to choose, I'm either going to play the best thing or I'm going to play something that counters it. And then of course we should see a week after that a recalibration of countering the counter, right? That whole triangular, we have the best deck, we have the counter to the best deck, we have what beats the counter to the best deck, and of course then the best deck will beat that secondary counter. if that
Yeah,
makes sense.
yeah, no, exactly. So just to give it 3 builds, right? Let's say Poison Dooley's the best. Maybe Poison Dooley has no match against Aggro Vanessa, who could just deal 5,000 damage in 5 seconds or 4 seconds, something like that. And then Aggro Vanessa gets her teeth kicked in by like a tanky shield pig or an HP pig because he just has too much regeneration over time. And then Poison Dooley fucking destroys that version of pig, right? Like, so like there is like obvious right now it's like we're in the Poison Dooley phase. We're hoping that we'll be able to get the counter to poison Dooley, and then the counter to that will add a third. By that, the people aren't going to want to get dominated. So if this build is still if the Dooley build's still insanely strong, but there's a good counter to it, some people will start playing the counter to the counter, and that will encourage people to play the initial really powerful stuff. So it'll create a more diverse metagame. And I do want to say that I think this game has an advantage in the sense that I think it has one of the strongest setups for playing counter decks or counter builds, whatever, because everyone's already played the game. Your opponents are all people that have already played the game, so you're kind of looking at a little bit look into the past. You're kind of looking at like the next, like a day or two ago. I don't know exactly how many ghosts they have, how old they are, but you're not playing live opponents who are trying to counter your counter, right? You're playing people that have already played the matches, and so you already know what the meta is. And so by trying to counter it, you're even higher on the percent chance of finding the thing you're trying to counter. So if the counters don't work, I think it's even a worse sign in this game that the counters aren't working. But I also think it has an advantage in the sense that you are kind of rewarded for countering stuff because again you're going up against other people in the past. And I just this stuff we're talking about I don't think is all just like metaphorically how it could work. I want to point out a very specific example. It was Pokemon Pocket came out. We talked about this before the podcast, but that game came out, they had no changes to their cards at all for a month before it came out, and now a month afterwards there's still been effectively no changes that I could think of other than like adding 1 or 2 irrelevant cards. In the meta, at least in the month we played, week to week to week, the meta was different. The decks winning tournaments were different. The decks winning, lots of stuff was different. People were putting out different, and it's not just because people got bored and started experimenting. It's because just the meta could keep shifting because they knew there were no changes coming. People were determined to beat decks that beat powerful decks, and then that caused different decks. So it is possible for games to have a very, very diverse shifting meta with no changes that's completely driven by player actions, which is what meta is. Meta is just what players are doing, not necessarily what's powerful. It's how do you beat other players, what are they doing. Players just tend to aggregate around what is powerful. But yeah, so this is something that very realistically happens as well. Do you have anything to add to that? I actually thought you were talking and I was like, you know what, I think this game is easier to counter than in other games. I wasn't thinking about that before.
Think that's awesome. For sure. And then I wanted to give my own example.
Yeah,
Another example of this where I've experienced this was in the original standalone Gwent, right? So not the Gwent that exists now and not the Gwent in Witcher 3. But when they first rolled out, like the beta version of Gwent as we know now,
I love that
it
game.
was fundamentally different, but it was an unbelievably brilliant card game. It was much closer to chess than a card game. And I loved it. So after it had been out for probably about a year, it had come out of beta, etc. We had our first like Christmas outside of beta, and they did the same thing. They shut down for 3 weeks. CD Projekt Red is really big on trying, to give their employees time, etc. Unless you're about to close out Cyberpunk 2077 and then you make people sleep under their desk or whatever. But outside of that instance, they had a reputation of being very good to their employees. And so they had 3 weeks off, and the rest of us were like, what? No, we can't be stuck with this meta for 3 or 4 more weeks. We've already been playing this meta for like 1 week or 2. And it's the exact same like situation. I didn't think of it until now. But the evolution through those next 3 to 4 weeks of what was playable in the meta, there was actually 2 decks that ended up being probably the strongest decks at the end that didn't even exist at the beginning of the meta, right? And I'm not sure if that was really good design. I'm not sure if that was really good deck builders in the game. I'm not sure why it happened. But I think that we have a possibility of that being the reality of this game. I just think it's a lot harder to spread the word to people who don't watch content on the game, and we're a much bigger game than I think that game was.
That's true. And also, so like, I think it's mostly a trial by fire if the game is good or not. And that's not necessarily true, because even if everyone stops playing the Bazaar for a month, I still think the game is great. But I think it is like a trial by fire in the sense where if people are passionate and they want to play the game, they will put in the work to find something that can counter the stuff. Now, this game again, because you can't force builds, it is inherently a little bit harder in that aspect. But players will either be like, all right, we're going to work really hard, we're going to figure it out, we'll forcibly change the meta of our own game by our own actions, or players are just like, it's boring, everyone stops playing. And I think, like you said with Gwent, people doubled down because they were having a good time with the game, and they were determined, the passionate players were determined to make a change, and they single-handedly formed the meta, right? They changed the balance of the game because discovering new stuff. And like you said, I think the Bazaar could do that. I mean, I think literally preparing as like a godsend for the game. Like, I think he has made this company so much money. I hope he gets some of it back. But because he has an internal rule of just playing in a fun way, right? I don't know how much of that is self-driven by his desire to play the game in new, interesting ways, and how much of that is for the sake of content, being able to just do his job. But in a sense, I don't care, because he does make fun videos to watch of all kinds of builds and this. And yeah, there'll be, of course, repeats because there's a finite number of things to do. But he's like a godsend to the game, and I think he could alone, if he finds something broken and popularizes something. But on the other hand, I also think there's a bit of a double-edged sword there, where if he is determined that something is broken and overpowered, I think that will trickle down into other people's zeitgeist as well. But hopefully that just encourages people to beat the shit out of that as well. So yeah. Overall, I forgot what I was started saying, but I'm in a positive. I actually am excited to see how the game handles this multi-week. I would have never in a million years asked for this, and yet I am still excited to see the outcome. You don't always want to brush your teeth, but you should. The kind of thing.
Yes. And the other thing is, it gives the naysayers an opportunity to be right. So if we end up, like, Kriparin's kind of been away from the game for the most part because PoE2.
PoE2, yeah.
If I had to guess, over the next 2 to 3 weeks, he'll come back more towards the game, right? Maybe do more like split streams and stuff like that. And he is the biggest voice we have in the game, and therefore him purposely playing anti-meta, making some videos on how to beat, the meta, will be very helpful in transforming that meta. And if the meta is not transformable for the average player, right? Because skill level is important. Sometimes, to be able to play some of these anti-meta builds, you have to really have a high game knowledge and skill ceiling to be able to take advantage of rare drops, right? So like monster loot drops when you get an actual weapon from them or whatever it is, sometimes can give you the ability to play something that's anti-meta that you never would have had access into the game, etc. So those are not the solutions that are going to kind of fix the meta, but Crip has enough of those of builds that are not those one-off lucky builds like that, where he will show you, we're going to play Big Pig today, and no matter what we get, we're going big HP, and we're going to make sure that we can OHKO them one way or the other, and he will show you how he navigates and gets there 80% of the time, right? Like, I would say he gets like 10 wins like 80% of the time. So, and he does that in metas where he's forcibly not playing the best thing and still maintaining top 300 status in the world, which is unbelievable.
He maintains an insanely high ranking for how much he plays. A lot of people, I don't know about a lot of people, but in games like this, a lot of people that get to the top, they won't play. They'll just hold on to their MMR because they're too afraid to lose their MMR from playing. He has a job to do. He just keeps grinding, and even if he doesn't climb, he doesn't fall to 2,452. He doesn't fall 2,000 ranks like I did. So yeah,
exactly.
That's crazy.
So one other thing that we had to talk about was the positive effects that this is going to have for Dooley. This is Dooley's first time in the sun. Dooley is a very hard character to play because of the 6 cores and because each of them generally act completely different. Because even though there's like 3 cores, like crit core, the real core, and the weapon core, probably are very similar build style-ish.
Yeah.
But they're of varying difference in power levels and what they give you access to on the high end. But even with that said, the other 3 cores, shield, friend core or companion core, whatever, and the fiery core, those 4 different like builds, if you want to think of it that way, are so remarkably different in experience that you have to have the game knowledge of each of those 4, which is tough because it's hard enough to learn how to play just the character Vanessa, not Vanessa 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, 4.0.
Yeah.
So that's why, even though Pig, in my opinion, has the same level of depth that Dooley has, he has less uh, guardrails, right? So like when you take Armored Core, it kind of cuts away a lot of the options you have. You're forced to kind of play these builds, and if you don't know how to play these builds, you're screwed. If you play Pig, you might have the ability to play a crazy amount of builds, but you can say, I'm only really going to play 3 of these because those are the only ones I know how to play, right? And I'm never playing HP Pig, and I may never have 26,000 health, but it doesn't mean that that never was an opportunity for me to do in every, maybe not every single game, but you get the idea that it's never directly shut off because of your pre-day one decision.
Yeah, and I don't want to hear anyone in the comments saying, "Listen, I get shield core and I still can win with burn dually." Yeah, of course. Like you don't need to use the core like it's pointed out every now and then. But if you go up against someone of a similar skill level, you're playing burn dually and they're playing burn dually, but they got the burn core and you didn't, like they're probably going to win. Assuming whenever someone makes a point, I want you to assume out loud that you're facing someone of similar skill level when you're about to make your point, because most of the time people just say that they're better than everyone and then I could beat them with anything. I'm like, just assume you're fighting some, because eventually the goal is you're going to run up against someone that is equally as good as you, or better, and you want to have at least be on par with them. Anyway, that's a side point, because I hear a lot of, when I talk about card games, people are like, I play off meta stuff all the time and I win, or I don't have the optimal deck, I'm only running 3 copies of this card instead of 4 copies. And it's like, yeah, but note that last card does make a difference in a setting where you're going up in an act where you're playing against a lot of people and of all similar skill levels. That kind of shit matters, because the difference between 52% win rate and a 53% win rate or a 49% win rate, that's big shit. That all those little percentage points are literally the entirety of climbing. Anyway.
Yeah, and well, no, I actually think that's a really good point, and it's something that me and Platt try to stay aware of, right? So it's like we try to make the balance between not acting like we're the greatest players in the whole world, because we are top legend players, right? We're like probably in the top, I don't know, 5% of all players, right? Whatever
Damn
it
right.
is.
Damn right.
That's great. But we're not in the top 100. So we know there are people far more skilled. And the higher you get in these kind of rankings, like the difference between being a 50th percentile player and a 60th percentile player is probably something you could learn in one day. The difference between being where me and Platt are or being a top 100 player, which might be the difference between like 4% and 1%, is probably like 3 weeks of dedicated learning and gameplay. You know what I mean? Like for us to get to where they are today. And of course, they'll continue to get better over those three
Yeah.
weeks. So,
I mean, just think
so
about
we're
it.
actually really far.
Sorry, you can go ahead.
We're really far away from being a top 100, let alone a top 10 player.
Yeah, and I was just gonna say, just think about it in chess regards. If I'm a 1,000 elo player, I can get up to 1,500 or 1,200, 1,300 in a couple weeks of training and coaching and just like learning some basic openings. Whereas if you're a 2,600 GM and you want to get to 2,800 GM, that might like literally be impossible. Like it might just like you might literally not have it in your human body to ever be able to do that, because there's only like 3 people or whatever. Like Magnus is like 28 something something. So it might like, so as you get higher up on those rankings, those each point, the skill difference on each point is significantly higher and way harder to push. But that's just what elo is in general. But yeah.
And then we try to balance against that and also balance against the fact that like um, we are going to speak, like most people who watch this video are not going to be as good as us, even though it'll be more than you would expect, because people who tend to watch videos about content are people who tend to be better at games and more dedicated to games. But
Yes.
there's going to be some people who are better than us, who are in the top 1,000 or top 2,000 players, and are looking to continue learning through other people's portrayals and experience. But there's going to be a lot of people who are just trying to get better at the game, who might not even be in Legend yet, or just might have picked up the game recently. And so we want to give advice that kind of, like he said, it makes you better against people of your skill level and grows your skill level at the same time, right? So it's like you're slowly doing the staircase of, we're going to learn something, we're going to apply it. We're going to learn something, we're going to apply it. And if your if your experience is like, if you're ranked 900 in the world right now, and you say, well, I just win with no matter what I play, that is an opinion that like has no validation, doesn't mean anything. Like it's great. You're a really talented player and you're able to beat people worse than you consistently. But it's like that doesn't make whatever you're doing good.
Exactly. Yeah, it's so it this is like a badge of honor so many people do, and not just in the Bazaar, but in every game you play. People be like, you could call it fucking Elden Ring, all right? People, the game will come out, it's a hard game. People be like, this game's hard, and then you'll get like, well, this game was supposed to be hard, you know? I mean, I beat the whole game without dying once, and I one shot every boss. I've also played every Souls game for 50,000 hours. I'm like, this is you are not the measuring stick. All right, you are the lake. I don't know what that means, but it sounded deep, and I'm gonna keep it in. But like, you are not what we should be using to gauge difficulty on. If you're a top 1,000 player, yes, maybe the game feels balanced because you could win with every character, but you shouldn't forget that where you are versus where the average is. And this is a video game that is designed for entertainment first. It is never gonna be. It'll be highly competitive in the sense that humans are naturally highly competitive, but Tempo is not going to give us a lot of resources to ensure it's a highly competitive esport. It's designed to be a streaming game that's fun for a huge amount of people. So they're going to balance it for the average person, which is
Exactly.
just,
And Reynad said that he said he wanted this game to be made for 1 billion people to play.
yeah. And you know what? In a sense, it is, because you could genuinely have fun getting 0 wins. Maybe not after 1,000 hours of playing. You know, after a couple hundred games, getting 0 wins, so I'm just like, fuck. But like, even when you're just playing the game, learning it, like just getting 0 wins, because of the death penalty and how many times you could die and reviving, you get to feel like you're still making a build. And even if it doesn't click together, you could be like, ah, dang, okay, that just didn't work, I guess. But I still think that's why matchmaking could be important, but I understand what his arguments against it still, because it is annoying to be new and get stomped. Like a new player coming into this game right now, if you're one new person, you just bought the game because you saw Kriparian play it, I feel bad for you because the skill level of the player base is way higher than when we started. So you are going to get freaking flatlined, bro. That's why but once they
Yeah.
add the PvE mode or whatever, that should address a lot of the those concerns.
Yeah, I want to remind everybody that day one, I went from the tutorial, which I don't count as a game, and I won 3 10 wins in a row. That was my very first experience in this game because everyone knew nothing, and my previous game experience just gave me a slight edge, right? That's all you need is that slight edge when nobody knows what they're doing. Now, I probably could not nail off 3 games, and remember, there's no matchmaking, right? And I'm a legend player. I probably am not going to hit 3 10 wins in a row when I get off of the stream because the player base has drastically closed the gap between me and them.
Yes, I mean, and that's just the way games go when it's a stagnant player base in its current state, which is like fine. It's just because it's a closed beta, people are going to be waiting. Like, no one's gonna at this point. Almost no one is going to jump in when the free version is coming out very soon, and like the full release is coming out is very soon. So like almost no one's jumping in. So the players that are here are all very good, and they're going to keep getting better. And so, yeah, it is a rough time for a new player, but I don't think we're not too concerned about them right now. But I am concerned for them in a month, for sure. When they come in, hopefully there'll be enough new people that come in, and they'll all be able to butt heads against each other. The no matchmaking will be rough. I kind of hope they erase all the ghosts. I don't think they will, but I think that when they
I think
release
they
open
will
beta,
reduce them down to like 1,800 or whatever they did on the last one. You know what I
okay.
mean? The minimum number of ghosts that they can have. But I'm curious to if they're going to have a reset, right, of rank when open beta comes, or if they're going to wait for the actual launch to do that.
Yeah, I don't know. They
If the
will reset rank, but I don't know when, like you said.
Yeah. So that's very interesting to me. I'm also very interested in because really for like open beta, I hope they don't reset the rank. Not because I need to keep my position, but because it actually doesn't matter. There's no matchmaking. I was gonna say if there's matchmaking, I just don't want them to get destroyed by the good players. But that's gonna happen no matter what. So I don't even. Never mind.
Yeah, that'll be where the PvE really like shines. Where if you can go in and fight a bunch of bots, that'll just make your play experience. Because the game is like the actual time you're facing the opponents are very little. You're mostly playing with yourself on camera. You know, I'm joking,
Yeah.
but yeah, you're
Which
mostly
is what
just
I do every
playing with yourself.
Saturday night.
Exactly. That's why we're here. We're here to that's the second part of the podcast. That's on our
Yeah,
Patreon.
yeah. Patreon only for that. But yeah, I think it's very important what Platt said. I think another thing that they did great in game design that allows people to feel like they're improving is as you get the meta game of can I beat this monster out of the 3 monster selections, and you're able to take on harder and harder monsters, even if you can't beat a real person. That's another measuring stick that you can use internally. That's just kind of natural. You're like, oh, I used to lose to the PVE monsters. Now I beat the left PVE monster, and I usually beat the middle PVE monster. And then you can see, oh, now I'm beating the right PVE monster unless it has a glowing big border, and then I can't beat it.
Yeah, if like, don't worry, if you can't beat Lich, it doesn't mean you're bad at the game. But I mean, yeah, for the most part, like most of my builds by the day could beat the harder monsters now, with a few exceptions. Like Borrier's really hard, and there's a few like min-maxy things that they could, like even the retiree I actually find to be pretty hard, and Hydro dude, like some of those early ones can be rough, but for the most part, like I measured my skill increasing, because like now for the most part it was like I could beat these harder fights way easier than I did, and they weren't all nerfed. It was just like my builds are in a stronger point at an earlier part of the game, because you get better at the game, you kind of know what to look for. So that is a great measuring stick as well. I love the PvE encounters. I think that was a very smart idea. And also, I was talking about this on a previous video. You know what, I never released that video because I just didn't. They were asking for like custom cards basically for the game in like one of their videos, or custom like content, and I was basically saying what impresses me, that like a custom card is cool. This is kind of a tangent, but a custom card is like cool and it's interesting. You can make fun cards that fit a niche that isn't quite being filled. But another thing is, like, if you could design a PvE monster encounter, that is a really tough task to do, because you need to not only design its items, like its unique items, you need to have those items synergize in some way. Then you need to have loot items that go along with it. Then you need to have skills that synergizes, none of which while being too powerful, but still being powerful enough where you're like, oh, this would be better. This is an unoptimal build, but a player could optimize this even more, all while having it balanced to a specific day based on player power, and having it all be thematic with something. It's like making those PvE encounters, I think, is an incredibly difficult job that the designers have done a very good job on. Like, I don't think I could design a PvE encounter without a lot of work. I could design 10 items that were like, this is a cool item, you know, that does that. But having such a cohesive encounter, I think, is a very huge selling point of this game. Except for that Sergeant Suds like art, everything else has been a 10 out of 10 for those fights.
Yeah, I really love the thematic pieces. The voice lines are great. Like I love when the econ selling guy, right? He sells econ items, and he says hi to Pygmalion by name because, like, you know, they know each other and they're old buddies because they're both
Oh, the
merchants, right?
merchant is
So
like,
it's like,
Mr. Pygmalion, welcome.
yeah, exactly. So like all of those little kind of lore things and stuff like that. So game's amazing. Just to wrap up the Dooley thing, I think they're going to learn a ton from Dooley being at the top of the meta and really seeing the disparity of how the cores do, because he's had the lowest play rate, so they've gotten the least amount of data out of that, and I'm excited to see what they decide to do once they have better data on that. So once they come back in January 6th, I think they're going to have such rich data, you know, a full meta playing out. They're going to be able to actually, instead of reactively acting on what we say is overpowered and what their short-term data says is overpowered, they're going to have long-term data sets that show what actually is, you know, achieving whatever level, you know, whether it's 55% win rate, 60% win rate, whatever is unacceptable across a player base. And sometimes you have things where, like, bad players or average players, whatever, are not good with these items, right?
Yeah.
But as soon as you get to a certain skill level, they're at a 70% win rate. So like there's different things that make it so like sometimes you have to balance something and make it weaker, even though the average player is like, man, that already sucked. Like I wasn't gonna play that anyway. But it turns out it was actually broken on the top end.
Yeah, that's a very common thing that happens in Marvel Snap, apparently, where it's like the card I remember was like Loki, right? But the point is, it was like a card that had like a between like a 48 and 51% win rate on like lower rarities, and then in the top like 1,000 players, it was like a 65% win rate card. It was like the best card in the game, and they destroyed it with it. So yeah, there are definitely things like that, but they're gonna have 5x the data on matchups, you know, by the time that they're gonna make these changes. So I bet that two things. One, I hope that makes them make the best patch of all time. Two, I hope this doesn't encourage them to keep this cadence. I hope they're not like, you know what, this is really good. I'm like, yes, this is good, but it's a good that we don't want to put up with. Normally, this is a special once a year occasion, you know, kind of thing. Um, really quick, what's this below me? What is this down here? What are these? My initial thoughts are gumballs, but they are different sizes, and no one puts gumballs out like that. My second thought was piggles, but they don't look anything like piggles. Everything else here is like a fucking item in the game. What the hell
Well,
is
that
it?
vase that Jay is holding is not an item in the game. I think those are like just some sort of like, oh, I just had it on the tip of my tongue. Orbeez, right?
I
That's
know
what they
they
look
look
like.
like Orbeez, but like also what I thought was weird is because like this person's like holding one too. I think it looks like they're holding an Orby, but they look like the Orbeez. But like almost everything else is like, yeah, maybe this vase isn't. It's a Mac item actually, but yeah, it's like, you know, the globe, ship in a bottle, like the deed, like these are all like literally items in the game for the most part. Even the
Yeah,
security
even on
camera.
the far left where you have like the captain's wheel and
Yeah.
then you have that pot. That pot is actually um it's it's the poison and fire thing, right? Where it gives like or no, it's the medium poison skill, right? It's that
Yeah.
pot.
And so it's like, that's why I thought it was weird. Just like the very first thing I see in the bottom right corner every day by the settings menu is like these things that I don't even think are in the game. But you
And
can even see like
we
open
very
sign and
much
close sign down here, I think, right? Like,
ooh, that's a good point. That is one of the two signs. I don't know which one because I don't play them, but um oh, that's cool. Do you see in the background because I see that like I don't even know which robot that is. Is that like the duplicate vendor on that sign? But like you would expect to see
oh, here,
what
yeah.
is
This
what are
looks like the lemonade
Pygmalion?
stand almost.
What's the Pygmalion's big
Yeah,
sign? I'm surprised
billboard.
that's not in the background. Yeah,
Bill.
billboard. Why is there's a billboard of something else in the background, not his billboard?
It looks like they try to keep the main character's faces off of it, but it's like because you could put like an ATM, which is funny because there's only one ATM in all of the bazaar. Um, but like because this is probably skyscraper here, and then I bet some of these other buildings are actually structures that are like different characters that I'm not recognizing. Maybe that's a space scraper all the way back here. Um, and things like that, or maybe this is even, it's hard to tell, but this could be landscraper actually. This does look like landscraper, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So overall, I mean, this is an incredible piece of art. Like, I actually really like this background. It's not what the podcast is about, but what we were talking about was basically the positives of there being such a big
So
gap in patches. So I'm kind of,
you
I
know what
don't,
I just saw for the first time?
what?
All right. Go over to JJ's head and then move maybe an inch up diagonally to the camera.
Yeah, yeah,
Right. That's the
security.
shitty
That's the
camera.
Dooley's
Yeah.
security camera.
Yep.
I actually love that. It's not even connected to anything. Actually, it is. Look at there. It might
Yeah. There's a
be.
little wire.
There's a wire here. I don't think this is the wire,
Yep.
but I think it goes here and it wraps around and then it comes up here. So it is. Oh, and this is the Jabalian longbow, I think, right here.
Ooh, Jabalian longbow. Yeah, I have not spent much time looking at this. Is that Lich's book on the shelf, like
Wait,
by the? Yeah.
I don't think so. I think it's a. Oh, it might be. It looks like it's a cup of coffee almost with things, but it could be a hand. I don't think they could see that beneath my camera.
Somebody's book. I don't know whose, you know. And some of these could be like this could have been made a year ago, right?
Yeah,
And then they could have decided to pitch a few items that they might be bringing back someday in like an item pack or something, but
100%. I mean, it. Like, I don't know what this is, but this is clearly going to be something.
well, I think that's actually in Dooley. It just kind
Okay.
of looks different because in Dooley you look at it directly on set and it's not on a telephone pole. But there is like a switchamadoo in Dooley that I never use.
This could even be. I mean, not this, but there is like a pylon, right, for Dooley somewhere. I
Yep.
don't. And this is a big egg. I don't know. Maybe that's a Mac building. That's the only other character I can remember. But yeah, is there anything else you want to add about the positives to
No,
about
that
the
was what I had
patch
for
notes?
positives. And you know, if you want to close on negatives, or we can just wrap it up.
No, I kind of spoke about the negatives. Everyone kind of like we said we weren't really going to talk about the negatives because we understand. Everyone knows what the negatives are. Why do we want a bunch of patches? Because we want the game to stay fresh and exciting and encourage people to keep playing the game. Because the more people playing the game, the more people will play the game. Because people like feeling part of a community, and it makes it more fun. You get to use your problem solving to discover a new meta. However, Not everything is always upside and not everything is always downside. So having weekly update patches is good, and I would prefer that. But there are some downsides where they don't ever get full information about the changes that they're making. The meta never really settles in a sense where it doesn't get stagnant, but it never really gets solved in a real sense. And, you know, when there's long patches, of course there's upsides like we talked about. They're going to have really good information so they can make really good patches. Also, it's going to allow really creative players to shine and really start climbing a lot of ranks, because if everyone's playing a build and you can find out how to beat that build, I mean, it just 101. You're going to be at a huge advantage, because you're going to have a guaranteed like 9 out of 10 matchups, and then maybe 1 out of 10 isn't meta, and you're maybe powerful enough to still beat it, you know? So yeah, that's all I have to say. I don't have anything else for today's podcast.
All right, well, thank you everybody for watching. Make sure you go over to Platt's other channel, which the link should be in the description, and give it a like. He does mostly gacha games and other similar pop culture things, like we did Pokemon for a little bit and some other stuff like that.
I cover pretty much every major JRPG that comes out. I play gacha games, and right now I did actually make 2 videos on PoE 2. They're not doing good because I know they wouldn't, but I was playing the game so much. Like the point is the channel is to share things that I like. And I was like, you know what? I got to talk about this game at least a little bit. But yeah, I'm all ready to sign out. All right. Much love. Per platypus is per ploutopus. I'll see you on the flip flops. Bye.
On the rise, watch the views go.